Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on which time zone you are in. And welcome to the Zoom webinar of Center for Return titled Man, Pinnacle of Creation, or What is Man that you are mindful of him? We are very fortunate to have addressing us today Dr. Ephraim Greenfield, a noted physicist, a world expert in laser technology and infrared optics. Dr. Greenfield begins his biographical sketch with the fact he studied Torah with Harav Leib Bakht, a great Torah scholar. This is mentioned before his many great accomplishments in physics. This fact deepens my admiration for Dr. Greenfield, who immigrated to Israel to be of help to our Jewish nation. And incidentally, all the lenses in the Iron Dome missile defense system were produced by Dr. Greenfield's team. It is my privilege to present to you Dr. Ephraim Greenfield.
Thank you, Avram. Today, I'm going to talk about, as it says in the title here, whether we, man, are the pinnacle of creation and everything was made for us, or we're just a speck in the vast universe and we're not of much importance. And science has a lot to do with which attitude you take. And I'm going to show that science is pushing us in a direction you wouldn't think of, especially science of the last 20 years. So we see that, do you see my cursor here? Yeah, okay. So we started out with God creating the universe. That's what people believed. And the universe was created for the benefit of man. Then little by little, as we learned more about the vastness of the universe, we started believing that we're less and less important. We're just a speck somewhere out there. Until today, we can believe again that the universe was created for us. And all of what I'm going to tell you, every single thing comes from scientific findings published by scientists from the last 20 years or so. So the biblical account of creation, the 6 days of creation, according to the Sefer Bereshit, Genesis, the first day there was light, and the second day there was the earth was created, the water, the firmament. On the third, life was created after its kind. Beings reproduced themselves. On the fourth day, the lights of the heavens, the sun, the moon, the stars. And on the fifth day, the swarming creatures, the simpler creatures, the insects, crustaceans, the reptiles. And on the sixth day, we have the mammals and the beasts of the field. And at the end of the sixth day, man. So that was the story of creation according to Genesis. Now, according to all ancient belief, the earth was flat. The earth was floating in a sea. This is a picture of the way the earth looked to the ancients. Above the earth, there was the sky, which contained the sun, the moon, the stars, the clouds. Above there was a firmament, like a dome with water above the firmament. That's why it's blue. Underneath the earth, there was the great deep, the Sheol, here in the middle of everything was man. was ourselves were the center of the universe. That was the way it looked. Later on, maybe 2,000 years ago, people already knew, the Greeks and also our own chachamim, our own sages, knew that the earth was not flat. It was a globe, and but it didn't change our geocentrical view of the universe. The earth is in the middle, then comes the moon, some of the planets, the sun, the other planets, the stars. So that's the basic view of the universe had not yet changed. But then came science. About 1500, the year 1500, Copernicus determined that the earth is not the center, the sun is. The sun is the center of the universe, and the earth goes around the sun. And this was the beginning. This was called, it's called today, the Copernican revolution, because he made a revolution. He took us away from the center. The earth is going around the sun, and the church was not very happy about this either. So this was the beginning of the lowering of our importance in the universe. And then around the year 1900, it was discovered that our sun is only one of many, maybe 200 billion large and small stars in our galaxy. With our naked eye, we can't see that many stars, but with big telescopes that already existed, they could see billions of stars, and they were arranged in a pinwheel kind of arrangement. And our sun isn't even in the middle. Our sun is off somewhere in the edge. So looks like we're really not so important. There are billions and billions of stars. We're not even in the middle. We're somewhere in some obscure location. And then around 1950 or somewhat before that, it was discovered that our galaxy with the 200 billion stars is only one of 100 billion other galaxies in the universe. We really are just a speck. So, and then came at the same time, meanwhile, Darwin came out with his theory of evolution, that life did not come about by design. Life came about by chance. There were primitive creatures, bacteria, and little by little, by little spontaneous changes, they were selected. The ones that were more successful were selected and became more and more sophisticated creatures, until step by step over all the eons, we came to ourselves. So by the survival of the fittest. So the universe and the earth were not planned for us. We are just here by chance. And you would think that we found evidence that Darwin is indeed correct. For instance, we see these are some different these are the eyes of some marine animals. We have a simple type with just some light-sensitive cells. That's the eye. Doesn't see anything, just light. Then you have more advanced, where it's in like a cup shape, so it can look in a certain direction. That's an improvement. And there's a further improvement where the light sensitive is inside of like a pinhole camera, and it can make a crude kind of image of what we're seeing. And then comes along something somewhat more complicated with a lens. And then we get to eyes similar to our own, with an iris, cornea, and a completely sophisticated system. So we see that all kinds of you would think that things change, step by step. And it would seem that Darwin is correct. Furthermore, we see even in our own time, we seem to see evidence of evolution in action. In England, there were white moths predominantly. And then as the air became more polluted by the Industrial Revolution, the moths turned dark because they provided better camouflage for them in the polluted areas, with blackened areas. So we see evolution. And more more importantly to us, we know that bacteria, if you give antibiotics with people with bacteria, some of the bacteria develop resistance to that antibiotics. So we see that there's a slight change, and the ones that are changed, the little red dots here, they soon predominate because the yellow ones are killed off, and before you know it, we have only the red kind. So there is evolution. You see, there was a change, a positive change, and it was selected by natural selection. So there's billions and billions of stars like ours, and many of them have planets that are fit for life. And life seems to appear all by itself pretty easily. So who are we? What are we? There must be many like us or even more advanced. So scientists started searching for these other creatures out there, the advanced forms of life. They took giant radio telescopes to look out into space and to listen for intelligent signals from space. And they've been doing this for years now. And what have they found? Zero. They have never found any intelligent signals from out there. Now, already long ago, the famous physicist Enrico Fermi asked, where are they? If they're all out there and they're all advanced, and why haven't they either come here or why haven't we seen their signals, and so forth and so on? According to our calculations, creatures out there should easily be able to see our signals, even from very far away with such telescopes. So that was the way it appeared about 1960, a very atheistic universe where everything comes about by chance. And in fact, most scientists and philosophers believe that the universe had existed forever. There was no beginning to it and no end. So there was an infinite amount of time for life to take place. Even if it's not very probable, it could come about in enough time. It's an infinite amount of time, right? And then in 1964, Penzias and Wilson, they were at Princeton University in New Jersey. One of them is a observing Jew, and they found signals from outer space that appeared to show that there was a giant explosion about 15 billion years ago. And this was corroborated by many other scientists, and this came to be known as the Big Bang. In other words, the universe didn't always exist. It started 15 billion years ago, and after, I'm showing in this graph, time goes this way and space goes this way. So it starts from a little point, and then first of all, atoms, particles, atoms, molecules are formed, and then we have gases and clouds of gas condense, and they become galaxies and stars until finally, here we are. Okay, so that was the first crack in that worldview. Now, it turns out that in the last 20 years or so, we have found a lot of evidence that everything is here not by chance. It's not by chance at all. And I'll first show you, first of all, the initial constants of the universe. In other words, when the universe started with the Big Bang, we had various elementary particles. The whole universe is made of. We had electrons and protons and neutrons and many elementary particles. Now, they have certain values. So scientists started studying what would happen if these elementary particles were different than the way we were. Now, we have, for instance, here, I'm giving you two random examples. The value of the electromagnetic force, the force that pulls the electrons, the positive and negative electrons together. What if it was different than what it is now? And what about the value of the strong nuclear force, the force that binds the nuclear particles together of all atoms in the universe? So if we were here, they made calculations. If we're in this area here, carbon could not exist. If carbon doesn't exist, then life doesn't exist. If we're in this area, you can't have chemical reactions. You can't have life without chemical reactions. If you over here, hydrogen can't form. And so forth. Here, stars can shine. And this little red area is the only place that would have conditions suitable for life. Now, here's another diagram, similarly, where you have the ratio of electron to proton weight, the electrical strength of the electron. These are elementary particles. These are the different values it can take. We're over here, right? If you were here, no stars. Over here, no atoms. Over here, no structured particles. And if you're over here, where the red dot is, do the conditions exist for life? There are many, many other examples, even more extremely fine-tuned. They call this fine-tuning. And in fact, there was a famous physicist, a famous astronomer, Fred Hoyle, who was an avowed atheist. And when he saw this, he said, it's clear that somebody saw us coming and got things ready. And he gave up on his atheism because he saw that it couldn't be. That's just one thing. Now, the second thing is, what about the conditions for forming our sun, right? We said before that we have 10 to the 22nd power stars in our universe. We have 200 billion galaxies, and we have 100 billion galaxies and 200 million stars, billion stars in the galaxy. So what about the conditions for forming our sun? It turns out, and our sun just seems to be some average yellow star in the middle of all the other millions of yellow stars. Well, it turns out that the conditions in order to have life, remember, life didn't take place over an infinite amount of time. Life now took place over something like 3 billion years, according to science. Okay, it took place in over 3 billion years, because our Earth only is here for 4 billion years. And during those 3 billion years, you have to have stability. You can't destroy anything. You can't have giant explosions. You have to have the right conditions for a long, long time. That is very, very difficult. So now I'm taking 3 different examples out of many, many examples. I have a list of many, many examples. But what about the galaxy we live in, okay? It turns out that only 1% of the galaxies will have conditions that are stable for long enough for life to take place. Either the galaxies, the stars start flying outwards or inwards, or they crash into each other, or the galaxies crash into each other. Only the spiral type galaxy of the type that we have, only 1% are, so you can already throw out 99% of the stars in the universe. They're not suitable. Now, what about the distance of our sun from the galaxy center? It turns out that there's a special distance where you see the arms of the galaxy, they rotate at one speed, but the stars inside the arms rotate at a different speed. Now, if the arms rotate at one speed and the stars rotate at another speed, they're going to crash into each other, and within a very short time, you're going to destroy any stars around. They're going to get rearranged and you won't have stability. Only at one place, this co-revolution distance, and if you figure it out, only if you're in between the big arms, if you're like in a place that there aren't too many stars around to crash into you. So it turns out that only 0.4% of the stars in this galaxy are suitable for life. So we throw out another 1,000 times of what's left. Then the birth rate of massive stars. Now, in order to get life, you have to have heavy elements. Zinc, copper, potassium, manganese, these elements do not exist in the space of things. They are created in big stars they're cooked in the center of these stars, and eventually those stars explode as a supernova. And when they explode, they spew out these particles. Now, you have to have enough of them that you're going to seed our sun with these essential elements for life. But of course, if you're too close to the supernova, you'll get blown up with it. If you're too far away, you don't get enough of these elements. So it turns out, again, only 1% of the stars are close enough to the supernova. So I'm giving you the idea here. There's another 38 conditions that I won't bore you with. But if you go through all the different conditions, only 1 out of a billion stars will be suitable for life. So it seems that we're not so average after all. And now we come to the Earth itself, which is the most amazing coincidence or design. It turns out, remember the Earth, I said before that there are billions and billions of stars, and many of them have planets and so forth. By the way, with more powerful telescopes that we have today, they have found planets around other stars. I think to date, they've found something like 5,000 stars around other planets. Not a single one of those 5,000 star planets is remotely suitable for life. Okay, so now what do we need for life? We need a lot of things. You need an atmosphere with just the right pressure and composition. We need oxygen. We need just the right pressure. It won't crush the people, but there's enough oxygen to get into their lungs. We need a surface with liquid water and not too much bombardment from space. Space is a very dangerous place. There are objects flying around all the time, crashing into places, and there's radiation that's radiating. So let's take a look at what we need for the Earth. First of all, the orbit of the Earth around the sun. If the Earth is too close to the sun, the water will boil. If the Earth is too far from the sun, the water will freeze. We have to have liquid water to have life. If the orbit of the Earth is too elliptical, sometimes it'll be too cold, sometimes it'll be too hot. So what happens that only 0.1% of planets will be in a position where you'll be able to have liquid water enough to support life. So that throws out already 999 out of 1,000 planets. And what about the moon that we have is very untypical. The moon that we have is 1/4 of the size of our Earth. Now it turns out scientists have done calculations of how that could have happened, and they postulate, everything I'm telling you comes from scientific papers. They postulate that a big asteroid crashed into the Earth at some point, at just the right time, of course, and it knocked out a big chunk of the Earth, and this chunk went into orbit around the Earth, and that's the moon. Now it turns out that collision created a lot of things that are necessary for life. First of all, that asteroid, it seeded the center of the Earth with iron, so there would be a magnetic field to drive away bad particles. Second of all, it stabilized the orbit of the Earth because of its orbit around the Earth. And third of all, it forces the Earth, so instead of once an hour, once every 24 hours. And most important of all, it knocked out most of the noxious atmosphere of the Earth, so the Earth's atmosphere would be thin enough that it could support life. Just the right amount of air, not too dense, not too thin. So the probability of all that is 0.1%. Then we have big planets out there. This is untypical. They look at other stars, and the planets around there are nothing like what we have. You have Jupiter and Saturn, these big giant planets out there further in around the sun. It turns out they have a very important function. These big asteroids come along. Once in a while, they do hit the Earth, and they cause a lot of damage, but most of them, they have a very big gravity, and that gravity sort of sucks them away from the Earth, so they'll crash into Jupiter and Saturn and not into the Earth. Now, what's the problem? The position is such that they are just close enough that they suck these things away, but just far enough they don't disturb our orbit too much. Now, scientists have studied the orbit. I'm taking Saturn, the same thing is true about Jupiter. If you take Saturn's orbit, and they did computer simulations, they said, let's change the orbit a tiny, tiny bit, 0.3%. When they changed the orbit 0.3%, it went into total chaos. And within a very short time, it started traveling through the solar system, destroying everything in its path. So it just so happens that it's finely tuned that the Jupiter and Saturn's orbit are just exactly right so that they're stable, and nothing is stable really very easily. So we have stability for 3 billion years. There's another 130 conditions, and the chance that you get a Earth that is suitable for life, here's the number, 1 over a number with many, many, many zeros. So we see that here are the conditions. Scientists have been finding these conditions that are necessary for life in the universe. Around the year 2000, there were a few of them. And we're up to today, we're up to over 1,000 or so special conditions. So the bottom line is, even if you have 10 to the 22 power stars, a mindlessly big number, but it's an even mindlessly bigger number, the probability that any of them will be suitable for life. So we have fine tuning. So you see that we're not so unspecial after all. We're very, very, very special. Okay, now let's get back to evolution. You remember Darwin postulated very small changes, little by little, create more and more complex creatures. Well, they've been studying the geological record for years, many years now. And again, in the last 20 years or so, they found that it doesn't work that way. There are no small little changes. There are no changes in a long time, then suddenly very big changes, what's called punctuated equilibrium. Here is a timeline of what went on in the geological record. The Big Bang, as I said, was 15 billion years ago. By 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth was born. The solar system had cooled down enough. A billion years later, things had cooled off and appeared life right away. The simplest kind of life is bacteria with no nucleus. Then a billion years went later by, and then we got photosynthesis, photosynthetic cells that can get their power from the sun. And then another billion years went by, and we got bacteria, more sophisticated bacteria with a nucleus, eukaryotic bacteria. Okay, and then another billion years went by, and we started getting multicellular beings up to the level of sponges or something like that. And then 0.6 billion years ago, you suddenly got almost all the different body plans of animals that exist in the whole world today. All of the different main lines of things existed within a period of 5 million, not billion, 5 million years. That's less than the thickness of this line over here. This line is just more than 5 million years. In other words, all of a sudden, we got all the different kinds. This is not small changes that happen all the time. This is a big problem for Darwinian evolution. Okay. So now we know enough to actually determine if life develops by chance or not. Until 20 years ago, we didn't know enough about how life works on the molecular level to make a calculation of it. But now we do. So we're going to take a trip down into small things, and we're going to go look at one of the simplest bacteria that exists, E. coli. We all know it inhabits, millions of them inhabit our bowels. And if you get too many of them, you get indigestion or worse. And this is the E. coli bacteria. Its length is 0.002 of a millimeter. You cannot see it with your naked eye. So let's see how it looks inside. Well, it's really not so simple. Even the simplest living creature has to do something unbelievable, which is to reproduce itself. In order to have all the machinery to reproduce itself, it becomes very, very complicated. It has many little particles in there that are constantly manufacturing proteins, and they're zipping them from one place to another, and they have different holes that let certain things in and don't let other things in, and so forth and so on. But we're going to leave that aside, and we're going to take a look at the little tail of this. This little tail spins around, and it propels the bacteria through the water. There's another little detector in there that sees where nutrients are. This little tail propels it towards the nutrients. Okay, so let's see how much it would take to create the tail of a little bacterium. This is what it looks like. The artist has like folded it over here, but really the tail comes out straight out like this and spins around at high speed. So the motor of this little tail here is it's got a stator and a rotor. If anybody knows anything what a motor looks like, this is a motor. It's got a rotating part and a static part. It has a shaft. It runs on chemical energy instead of electricity, but it spins at 18,000 revolutions per minute, more than a jet engine. And it can stop on a dime and turn around the other way. And under instructions of which way to go, it propels this little creature through the water. Now, that's all fine and wonderful. How do you get one of these by chance? How do you turn a bacteria with no flagella into a bacteria with a flagella, right? Now, that's what Darwin would consider a little change, right? Now, but it won't work without all its parts, right? So let's see how much, what is involved in making a little flagella by chance. Okay, so about 25 years ago, a guy named Professor Michael Behe, who was a professor of biochemistry, he wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, because he said, you know, Darwin had his theory, it's all fine and well, but it was all a black box to him. He didn't know what goes on inside, but already in his time, they started knowing what's going on inside. He said, now, what you have here is what he calls irreducible complex system. This flagella and its motor is irreducibly complex. If you take one of the pieces out of it, it won't work at all. So if you want to have natural selection, you're going to have a dead weight there of this extra piece of machinery that doesn't work. That's not going to select for anything. It has to be working, right? So it's like if you have a hook and eye, right? You have just the hook or just the eye, it doesn't do its function. You have to have both of them to do the function. So here you have to have all the pieces to make it work. It won't select for natural selection, it doesn't work. So this particular flagellum and its motor has about 50 proteins. Now, proteins are the basic building blocks of life, okay? And if only one of those 50 is not there and in the right place, it won't work. So let's see what is involved in by chance getting 50 proteins. Okay, now I'm just making this story simple so as to give it to the other side. Let's say that these proteins already exist. They're just not there in one place as a motor. All the proteins already exist in the bacterium, which is not true. Some of them do. Then what's the probability of getting these 50 proteins just into the right place? Well, there are 4,000 proteins, different types of protein in E. coli. Pretty complicated. It's not so easy to make life that reproduce itself. Now, what's the probability of getting just the right 50? Well, it's like taking your supermarket card. You go in the supermarket and at random you start taking things from the shelves and throwing them into your thing. You say there's 4,000 items on the shelf in your supermarket. People raised hand. Okay, well, at the end, we're going to have questions, I guess. So a supermarket, you threw in 50 items, and you come home, you throw them into a cake tin, and you get a delicious cake out of it. What's the probability of getting the 50 right items? Remember, you could be throwing in there lye or soap or all kinds of things that'll destroy the whole thing, or salt. So you, the probability of getting the 50 right items out of 4,000, this is the probability of it. 1 in a number with 200 zeros in it. So just to get to by chance the right 50 items and put them in the right place, not even to assemble them, has an infinitesimally small chance to happen at random. But we're not finished. Okay, so then the scientists the naturalistic scientists who didn't want to admit that there is a design in our universe, they said, well, you know, you don't have to get all of the 50 proteins at once. You can, there's another device here called injectosome. This has also a motor that turns around. It's similar, but instead of turning a propeller, it squirts poison into its enemies, okay? But most of the parts are there. So he said, all you have to do is, you only need, they say that you need another 4 parts to turn this into that. So you only need new parts. So that's, you need 4 proteins. This is the way, this is a micro picture of a flagellum, actually, okay? And here is a protein. Now, you see, this is what a protein looks like. Proteins are very, very, very complicated. The simplest proteins have about 150 units in them, and the average is about 500. So let's see what's involved in making a new protein. Now we get to the heart of the matter. They didn't know all of this stuff till, some of it till 5 years ago, because it's a very complicated process. But here it is. Bear with me. You have the code of life, as most of you know, is DNA. DNA has these little letters in there, which the little element, it has 4 kinds of chemicals. And depending on what order they are, that's the code that tells how to make life. So when life is going to reproduce itself, this DNA splits into 2. And another thing called messenger RNA hooks up with this DNA, and it copies the code there. So now you have a copy of the code in messenger RNA. Now this messenger RNA goes through a little device called a ribosome. There are millions and millions of ribosomes inside every living creature, or at least thousands. And this ribosome is a little machine that it like reads like a tape. It reads the RNA going through it, and every 3 units of it, it makes what's called an amino acid. These amino acids, they're the building blocks of life. They're the building blocks of proteins. There's 20 different kinds of them, okay? And for most purposes, most of them are done with 10 different kinds. So it now is making in order all of these amino acids according to the instructions from this code and this little ribosome. The ribosome is also a protein. It's a common protein. So now we come out with a chain of these letters of the alphabet of life, right? 20 letters in each, in the alphabet. The order which these letters are put together tells us what's going to happen. And then this protein is folded into a very, very special shape. Now, everything is in here. And the last 10 units or so of this amino acids, they're like a little instruction book. They tell the little devices in the cell. There are little devices, some of them help it fold, some of them move, bring it, they're called chaperones. They take it from place to place, they attach it to something else. This little instruction book tells the different machines in the cell what to do with it, where to put it together, how to fold it, where to put it, and so forth and so on. So it's like an assembly manual. So finally, after all of this takes place, we have an assembled protein. Now, I hope everybody's following. So we had in the year 2004, barely 15 years ago, a guy named Douglas Axe. He was a graduate student at Cambridge University. In 2004, he showed that proteins are very, very, very special. I gave you all these things about the probability of our planet coming about. Well, this is an even smaller probability. The probability of making a single protein that will be alive is very, very small. What did he do? He did an experiment. He took a protein that existed and he started knocking out, he started changing the amino acids here one by one. He made one change, made two changes. So after he made one change, only 1/3 of them were still alive. After he made two changes, only 1/9 of them were alive. He made three changes, only 1/27th, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, now if you have a protein with 500 units and you change all the units by chance, what's the probability they'll still be alive? 1/10 to the 250th power. These are unbelievably large numbers. In other words, the proteins are very, very rare that they could come about by chance to make one protein from another. So we were talking about making, all you have to do to make a new flagella is make 4 new proteins. Well, the probability of making a new protein is like if we take alphabet soup, right? I have a nice bowl of alphabet soup and I stir it around at random, and this is what comes out of it, right? I get a quotation from Shakespeare. Now, you show this to anybody, I say, yeah, I just stirred it around and that's what came out of it, right? So they're gonna look at me like I'm crazy or I'm making a joke, right? Because they know very well that the probability that that would happen is very, very small. Well, the probability of a protein, a live protein coming of a random combination is considerably less than that. So, okay, so we've shown that the probability of even the tiniest propeller of the tiniest bacterium just doesn't have any chance to come about by chance. But you'll say, yeah, but we have billions of stars and billions of years. So, you know, you fool around with it long enough, it's bound to come out in the end. So let's check that out also, okay? I'm doing this with numbers because other people, they wave their hands. I'm showing you numbers that come from science that prove it. We said they're 10 to the 22nd power planets, right? And I showed you before that each planet, that we're a very, very special planet, and it's very, very unlikely that any planets will be hospitable for life. But I'll give it to them. Let's say that every single star has a wonderful planet that's full of beautiful oceans and mountains and atmosphere. They're all suitable for life. I just threw that in, okay? And let's say that the oceans of every single planet are filled with 10 to the 36, they're filled chock full of nothing but E. coli bacteria. Yuck. So that we have 10 to the 36 power E. coli bacteria. It reminds me of when we say the prayer of Nishmat Kol Chai. If all the seas were this and so on and so on. Let's say that every one of these E. coli reproduces every second. They really take about 2-3 hours to reproduce, but I'll throw that in also. Let's say that. So then since the last 4th billion years, there were 10 to the 17th power seconds. So what do we get? This times this times this. That's the number of tries we get to get something new, 10 to the 75 power. But we need 10 to the 1,000 power to get 4 proteins. I showed you that one protein, you need 250, 10 to the, in other words, there's an almost 0 chance to make any motor of bacteria only from the beginning of time. That's the bottom line of all this. And there's no way that anybody can refute this. They try to refute it by saying that there are, well, you know, we don't just have our universe, we have an infinite number of parallel universes that they populate. In other words, they wave their hands and try and get away with the obvious conclusion, which we all know what it is. Okay, yeah, but what about all the changes we see? Remember, we saw the white moths turning into black moths, and we saw the bacteria getting resistant to antibiotics. So it turns out that all these changes are very, very simple changes. They usually involve one tiny mutation in one amino acid. That's all. What happens is usually there's a mutation in one amino acid, and that knocks out that particular protein, stops working. And because that particular protein stops working, it messes up something, but it also makes it more adaptable. In other words, those can happen. A very simple change can happen by chance. That's called microevolution. But macroevolution, to make something new, to make a motor where there was no motor, forget it. Oh, and the hand of God, of the Creator, is still here up till today. I mean, we saw how every single creature that exists that has any substantial change from a previous one had to come by design, intelligent design. So now this is a graph of the ice ages that the Earth went through. 1, 2, 3, 4. We went through 1, 2, 3, 4 ice ages. And here it's high temperature, it's low. As you see, every single time went up quick and then quickly down again. Went up, then down again. This time it's different than all the other times. It went up and it stayed steady for 9,000 years now. That means that it was suitable for highly intelligent technological life, which never, if we had this behavior here, we would have never been able to develop a life could live. Life could live, but you would never be able to have an advanced civilization. So we see that God is still tinkering with the universe. Okay. Now, what about Corona? Let's see, did that come about by chance or not? Well, they say, I'm going according to all the literature that I know of. I don't know what the Chinese had hidden away in Wuhan or so forth. They're not telling about. But according to all the information we have publicly, if you take a bat, these two types of corona, the bat corona and the pangolin, which is a kind of anteater, they are very close to the COVID-19 virus, which is bothering us all. Now, it's within, if you take these two together, and let's say that they intermingled with each other, which is quite possible, and you could get, with some combination, you can get within 1% of COVID-19. Now, the COVID-19 is a pretty complicated virus. Even though it's just a virus, not even a bacterium, it still has 10,000, it has 10,000 amino acid, it has 10,000 units in its genome. So 1% of that is 100. Remember, we're talking about the letters of the amino acids. So in other words, even if you took these viruses here, what's the probability that you're going to get a change of 100 letters there? Very, very small, 1 in 10 to the 66 power. Now I looked at, let's say we had 100 years of pangolins, and the Chinese love to eat pangolins. They eat about 1 million pangolins a year, and so forth and so on. But still the probability is much too small for it to have come about by chance. So if the Chinese are not hiding anything in their labs there, then it seems like God seemed to wanted to spring the COVID virus on us now, and that's that. And it couldn't happen by human design either. You can't, no scientist is smart enough to figure out how to change 100 amino acid letters. You could change 3 or 4, but not 100. So, if we've decided now that that man is the center of creation, let's go back to our story of Bereshit, of Genesis, versus the scientific story. Well, and the first day there was light, Big Bang. That ties together. The second day, earth, water, firmament, earth was born. Next stage. In other words, I'm saying if we take days as being periods of time and not literal days. The third day was the seed after its kind. In other words, life. Well, the bacterial life was created at that time, within this period of time. And the fourth day, the heavenly host, it turns out that the atmosphere of the earth was completely opaque. You could not see through it at all. If you were standing on the earth, you would not see a single heavenly body because it was full of this yucky methane, thick methane atmosphere. But little by little, the photosynthetic cells, as soon as a little bit of oxygen came about, a little light, they started eating up the methane and eating up the carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. And suddenly, it happened quite suddenly, the sky became clear about 1.8 billion years ago, and you could see all the stars of the heavens. So that's the heavenly hosts. And now, let's continue. On the fifth day, the swarming creatures and the reptiles, right? Well, we had multi-celled creatures, and as I told you about, the Cambrian explosion had all the different life forms, the fish, the land pans, the reptiles. So that was the fifth day, was the swarming creatures. On the sixth day, the beasts of the field, the mammals, came about 200 million years ago. And on the last hour, Yom HaShishi Bein HaShmashot, man, the sixth day comes about at the end of the sixth day. So if we look at the universe according to punctuated equilibrium, it's quite similar to the creation according to Bereshit, if days are taken as periods of time. So what have we learned? I'll now go over what we learned. We didn't learn how all it was made, but we certainly learned how it did not happen, okay? The creation is amazingly complicated, far beyond the dreams of our fathers and far beyond my own dreams when I was young. To make something that can reproduce itself is an amazing, amazing thing. And number two, it didn't happen by chance. There's an architect to the universe. Number three, we're not in the physical center of the universe. There is none, because it looks the same everywhere, but we're certainly in the center of the Creator's thoughts, because we're in the center. We're the only place that is suitable for life. The Creator is involved not just at first, but all the time up to the present. And natural selection works well. That part of Darwin works, but the changes cannot be explained as random. And all of this comes not from books of faith, but from science itself. Marabu masech Hashem ma'od amku machshvotecha. Okay, that's my presentation, and I'm ready for questions if anybody wants.
Rabbi Friedman.
So we've got several questions, all from Debbie Bindler. And so Dr. Greenfield, would you like to read the questions and then we'll answer live, or should I read them out?
Okay, I'll try to look at them. Let's see. I have to unshare my screen, right?
Yes.
In order to see it, yeah, okay. So I'm going to look at the question and answers. Okay. The question is, isn't Mendelian genetics different than the theory of evolution? Well, to my knowledge, Mendelian genetics, as far as I know, deals with the combinations of genes. In other words, how different types, he studied different kinds of beans, and he crossed them with each other, and he came to the conclusion that there are certain rules. Now, basically what it is that when you have two parents, which their genomes mix together, you can get different combinations. It's not the same as the theory of evolution, because Mendelian genetics is involved with how things combine with each other from the parents to the children. And the theory of evolution deals with how changes come about by mutations and they're selected by natural selection. So I wouldn't say it's the same thing. Does that account for what scientists today call evolution, e.g. white moths? No. The white moths and black moths comes about, it might be that there are genes for white moths and black moths already in the moths and they make a combination. But there are definitely mutations. We've already seen, by the way, in the coronavirus, we have already seen one mutation. We've seen one significant mutation. There are zillions and zillions and zillions of the virus, but we only seen one significant mutation. There was one amino acid that switched to something else and made it more infectious. And now the version of COVID that we have going around the world now is mostly that one with the mutation because it's more, it infects more. It's not more deadly, but it infects more. So I would say that the white moths and black moths are actually mutations. I believe that that's what they found, okay? How to account for the fossil record? Well, I'm accounting, I'm telling you that this is what has been found in the fossil record. They look upon in fossils of rocks, and they can look with a microscope and see even microorganisms. They can see the fossils of microorganisms. They see which layer it's in, and they calculate from that at what time it happened. And they see the Cambrian period was a very thin layer. Look, I'm only taking what science says. I assume that they know their business and they are postulating things. I took it as they themselves say it is. So they are experts in interpreting the fossil record, and that's I took from their views. How does our Masorah of a 6,000-year cycle fit into the Big Bang timeline? I don't know how. My presentation was mostly from the science side, and all I can say is that the sequence of things that happen fits very nicely with the Torah cycle, the number of years and so forth. I do not have any answer to that. Any other questions?
Yes, there are two more.
More questions. Okay. Did I understand you correctly that you believe that the Creator sent humanity? If so, why? Oh. I don't know. I certainly don't. I know the what, but I don't know the why. I really have no idea why Hashem sent it. I think Abraham is more along those lines than I am. But it would seem that Hashem did send us the COVID-19. Why he did it now is a good question. But maybe he wanted to teach humanity a lesson that they think they know everything already, and they don't know everything already. Okay. Where does Adam and Eve fit into this theory? Were they Cro-Magnon dinosaurs on the sixth day? That's also out of the scope of my presentation. There is an interesting book by my friend and colleague Gerald Schroeder, who wrote about Genesis and the Big Bang, and he believes. And he believes that that indeed Adam and Eve were Adam and Eve were a earlier version of man, and after Enosh there were other men, but I really am not an expert on that. Okay, you're welcome, Deborah Binder. They're gonna post it online. Moshe Rube, the end part of the periods, I have a question. Rabbi Siflin says that the scientific record shows a different order than listed in Genesis. Has the science changed since then? Well, as a matter of fact, I sent my presentation to Rabbi Slifkin, and he indeed said that he likes it, but he has a different explanation of what's going on, and I read his book. And but okay, let's that wasn't the main thrust of my presentation. Is not exactly how to fit it in with Genesis, but to show that you cannot support the idea by scientific evidence. You can't support the idea that there's no God. Now, last question here. I'd like to point out that Darwin originally proposed continuous infinity, which related because it contradicted Darwinism. Richard Friedman. Okay. Yeah, okay, I can understand that. Darwin thought that living matter was some kind of formless blob that could just change by it. He had no idea. The truth is, Darwin did say, it's quoted very much, he said that if it could be shown that life cannot change by small changes into something else, then my whole theory will fall down. So if Darwin was an honest man and he knew what we know today, he would have said, my theory does not hold water. Okay, anything else? I think I went through all the questions here. Yeah.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so we would all like to thank Dr. Greenfield for what I thought, humbly, was a phenomenal presentation. I loved it. And let's all give him a big hand.
Okay. Thank you, Abraham.
I have to be, full disclosure is I know Dr. Greenfield for decades. He is one of the humblest people that I know. And I'll tell you how I know him. Because he is my wife's uncle. And I am privileged to have him as my uncle now that I'm married for many years. And the more I get to know him, the more I really am incredibly impressed by his knowledge and his humility. And I'm very, very thankful, Uncle Ephraim, for that you came on and gave us this magnificent presentation.
Thank you, Avram, for your kind words. I'll give you a kosher for COVID kiss over here. And thanks for all of you for attending. And I hope everybody will be able to see each other in person soon.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much. All the best, and everyone, thank you for joining. We hope to see you in the future, and again in person, hopefully. All the best. All the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye.